I never thought I'd be the guy snooping through his wife's messages. But here I was, staring at the iPad screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was quiet. Sarah was at work, Emma was out with friends, and Luke was at his therapist appointment. It was just me and this damning evidence of my wife's betrayal. I scrolled through the messages, each one feeling like a punch to the gut. Sarah and James, laughing at my expense, mocking my attempts to save our marriage. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Horrifying, but I couldn't look away. God, Mike's been so clingy lately, Sarah had written. He actually tried to surprise me with flowers yesterday, as if that would fix anything. James' response made me want to throw up. Poor guy. He has no idea, does he? Maybe you should give him a pity fuck to keep him off the scent. I sat there numb, as I read through months of conversations. The flirting, the inside jokes, the thinly veiled references to meetups. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? I thought back to all the times I'd tried to reconnect with Sarah, the date nights I'd planned, the extra chores I'd taken on, the way I'd bent over backward to be the perfect husband and father. All while she was laughing behind my back with this James. My mind raced, trying to piece together who James was. An ex-boyfriend? A co-worker? I vaguely remembered Sarah mentioning a James from college, but I'd never thought much of it. Now, I wondered how many of her late nights at the office or girls' nights out had really been spent with him. I wanted to confront Sarah right then and there, to call her, scream at her, demand answers, but a small, calculated part of my brain held me back. If I showed my hand now, I'd lose any advantage I had. No, I needed to be smart about this. With shaking hands, I took screenshots of the most damning messages. I emailed them to myself, then deleted them from the sent folder. I logged out of Sarah's Facebook, my mind already spinning with plans. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine. I picked up Luke from his appointment, listened to him chatter about his day, all while my inner world was crumbling. When Sarah came home that evening, I watched her closely. She breezed in, all smiles and kisses for the kids. When she pecked me on the cheek, it took everything in me not to flinch away. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, her voice light and casual. I forced a smile. "Oh, usual." She noticed anything off about me. She didn't show it. She launched into a story about some drama at work, and I nodded along, all the while thinking about those messages. About James. James. That night, as we lay in bed, Sarah rolled over and snuggled up to me. "You've been quiet tonight," she murmured. "Everything okay?" I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to confront her. Instead, I pulled her closer, hating myself for the comfort I still found in her embrace. "Just tired," I lied. "Long day." She hummed in response, already drifting off to sleep. I lay there wide awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions, plans, and a growing sense of anger. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions at work, barely able to focus. Every spare moment was spent gathering evidence. I installed a keylogger on our shared computer, set up a hidden camera in our bedroom, and started keeping meticulous notes of Sarah's comings and goings. It was like I'd become a different person overnight. The trusting, devoted husband was gone, replaced by this paranoid, vengeful version of myself. But I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything. So I sat in our living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, my eyes fixed on the screen of Sarah's iPad. The blue glow illuminated my face in the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the room. I'd become a ghost in my own home, haunting the corners and lurking in the shadows, watching as my wife's betrayal unfolded before my eyes. The conversation between Sarah and James had taken a decidedly sexual turn. I scrolled through their messages, my stomach churning with each flirtatious exchange. My fingers mechanically took screenshots, cataloguing every damning word and innuendo. Evidence, proof, ammunition. I heard Sarah's laughter from upstairs. She was probably on the phone with him right now. But the sound that once filled me with warmth now only served to fuel the cold, seething anger that had taken root in my chest. I took another swig of whiskey, relishing the burn as it slid down my throat. It was the only thing I could feel anymore. Everything else had gone numb. The love I once felt for Sarah, the devotion that had been the cornerstone of our marriage, it was all rotting away. In its place, a festering rage grew, consuming me from the inside out. Days blurred into weeks. I went through the motions of our life together, a pantomime of normalcy. I'd kiss Sarah on the cheek as I left for work, my lips barely grazing her skin. She asked our day over dinner, my voice devoid of any real interest, All the while I was retreating further into myself, building walls around what was left of my heart. At night, I'd pour myself drink after drink, hoping to drown out the thoughts that plagued me. But even in my alcohol-induced haze, I couldn't escape the reality of my situation. My marriage was a sham, a lie I'd been living for God knows how long. As the numbness settled in, a new thought began to take shape in my mind. Revenge. The word tasted bitter on my tongue, but it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since discovering Sarah's infidelity. I started to plot, to scheme, to imagine ways I could extract myself from this farce of a marriage, while protecting what mattered most, my kids and my finances. I thought about the future, about a life without Sarah. It scared me, but not as much as the prospect of staying in this hollow shell of a relationship. I knew I had to act, to take control of the situation before it spiraled even further out of my grasp. After weeks of emotional withdrawal, I found myself sitting in a divorce attorney's office. The leather chair creaked as I shifted uncomfortably, laying out the sordid details of my crumbling marriage. The lawyer, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, listened intently as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice low and measured. "Mr. Thompson, based on what you've told me, you're in a strong position, but we need to play this smart. My advice? Keep gathering evidence. Document everything. And most importantly, keep a low profile. We want to strike when the time is right." I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. "What about our assets, the house, our savings?" "That's where things can get tricky," she replied. "But if we play our cards right, we can ensure you come out of this with your fair share, maybe even more." As she outlined potential strategies, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not for reconciliation, but for a future where I wasn't trapped in this lie of a marriage. So over the next few days, I threw myself into preparation. I opened new bank accounts, started moving money in small, inconspicuous amounts. So I catalogued our assets, made copies of important documents. All the while, I maintained my facade at home, playing the role of the oblivious husband. Sarah remained none the wiser, too caught up in her affair to notice the changes happening right under her nose. Each time she smiled at her phone, or made up an excuse to go out, I added it to my growing pile of evidence. Sarah's proposal for some girl's getaway caught me completely off guard that night. She came in from the kitchen with this air of nonchalance, wineglass in hand. But her offer of a spa weekend was delivered with a weird mix of casual concern and something else. I couldn't place it at first. But then it hit me. She thought she was clever, trying to pawn off her bullshit as some thoughtful time for herself to fix the void growing between us. She wanted me to buy into it, to believe the lie so damn hard that the jagged pieces of our broken marriage would magically knit themselves back together. I nodded along, acting like I gave a shit, said I understood. Hell, I even encouraged her, insisted she take the time for herself. What she didn't realize was she'd handed me another tool for my arsenal. That trip, for healing or whatever she wanted to call it, was just another mask, hiding one weekend away with him. James. For every time I even thought his name, my hands clenched into fists, and I had to will myself not to show it on my face. But my poker face had gotten pretty damn good by now. "Go relax," I told her warmly. "It will be better when you come back." I practically smiled, and she smiled back, probably relieved and thinking that everything was under control, that she still had me in the dark. God, what an idiot. The next couple of days were a mix of small conversations and awkward silences between us, with her packing and planning, and me watching silently, my mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour beneath a calm, blank surface. She didn't notice much, too focused on the countdown to her little rendezvous d'overs. I met with my lawyer during that time, shuffled assets around quietly. Our joint accounts became half mine, half hers. I didn't take more than my share. Why would I? I didn't need her money. I needed my kids, our kids, to be safe, to be far away from the soon-to-explode shrapnel of this whole mess. I spent extra time that week with Lily and Jackson, took them to the park, threw the ball around, made sure things felt normal for them. They were young enough that they didn't fully understand why things had been tense between us lately, but old enough to notice something was off. We watched movies at Friday night, picked out pizza, let everything feel like the world was just fine, so they didn't need to feel the weight of what was coming. They didn't need to know yet, and that wasn't their burden to carry. Watching Sarah pack that Saturday morning was like watching a sick play unfold. Every glance she threw my way, checking to see if I seemed suspicious, was met with perfectly feigned indifference. I asked her if she had everything she needed, and she nodded cheerfully, thanked me for understanding. Understanding? She thought I understood? If she only knew the extent of how clearly I understood by now. She leaned in for a kiss before she left. I gave it to her. It was mechanical on my end, nothing more than muscle memory by that point. She didn't sense the difference. As the door closed behind her, it felt like a trigger, like the cracks in the foundation of our relationship grew another inch wider in that single sound. She was walking into a final break she just didn't know yet. Everything was meticulously in place. The bank account squared away, the screenshots neatly stacked in that folder on my desk. Hours of pings and keylogger text, videos that would have made anyone sick. And yet she still wandered through the day-to-day, thinking she'd gotten away with it all. I called my lawyer again just to confirm, ran through the steps we'd take after the confrontation, making sure there were no loopholes that would trip me up. No backing down now. I was fully armed, fully prepped for the iceberg Sarah was about to crash into. That boiling pit of rage inside me, the one that had been simmering for weeks. It didn't flare up like I expected, though. In fact, the closer we got to the moment, the calmer I felt. Everything seemed to slow down, crystallize. It wasn't anger now. It was clarity. Clarity about what had happened, where we were, and how the fuck I was going to handle it. Even with a goal standing at the door that morning and talking about us, nothing inside me broke. I let her leave for her spa weekend with me waving from the doorstep. All to the hotel around 4 p.m. on Saturday. Early enough, I tracked everything, familiarized myself with their patterns long enough to know exactly when they'd be there. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I walked past the lobby toward a decorative armchair or one of the fake palms near the window. I sat, drumming my fingers on the armrest, staring calmly at the rotating door. I wondered briefly how James thought he could pull this off, meeting Sarah in some half-rate downtown hotel, using this place like it was your everyday secret love nest, and thinking they'd get away with it. And again, if they'd been as smart as they thought they were, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I waited. I dialed Sarah's phone after a while, no answer, as I expected. I wasn't her concern now, was I? Not when she was tangled up with him upstairs. I had no use for a voicemail. Instead, I pulled up my contacts and asked the front desk to connect me to James's room. That useless asshole's name bouncing in my head. It rang twice before I heard his voice, trying to play it cool, smooth, like he didn't just stand next to my wife half-naked a seedy hotel room. "Do you hear me?" Silence. I could almost imagine the blood draining from his stupid, smug face on the other end. "Sarah's coming down. Right now, or I'll be involving your wife next. I'm in it." Barely a breath from him. The line died. I hung up, leaned back, casually straightened my shirt. So I didn't need to chase him. I wasn't going to give them the luxury of privacy, of secrets, not anymore. This wasn't about catching anyone in the act. I was here to watch the aftermath, to kick the door open and linger just a few moments, so they wouldn't forget the feeling of my shadow over them. The elevator doors slid open. There she was, disheveled, pale, visibly shaken. Yeah, no surprise. Panic suits her more than I thought. She saw me immediately, her eyes pleading for me to be understanding, or to look past whatever topped her mental list of bad excuses. Like she didn't understand the purpose of my visit. I stood before she even had a chance to open her mouth and walked her awkwardly over to the nearest set of chairs by the entry hall. You don't remember how nearby people reacted. Don't remember if anyone was even paying attention. It didn't matter anyway. I wasn't letting humiliation get in the way of the real goal. I sat down across from her, opened the file folder. Every thick sheet filled with her own words poured out in black and white. All the evidence, the patient groundwork I'd laid. Her breath got shallow, like she knew exactly what was coming before I could even spell it out. "Time's up, Sarah." Her face wavered, didn't know where to focus me. Her lap, the goddamn lobby ceiling. I never gave her a choice, letting the stack of papers fall between us like a lead weight. Every strategic photograph, every saved conversation passed between quiet evenings in our living room. Her world thoroughly documented, slipped away with each shift of the wind-flipped pages. So I handed her the check and the agreement. Half the money, half the life she faked pretended to value, only when it was convenient. Her eyes froze on the pile, wet and wide, desperate for anything but this reality. But her fingers shook, but she reached for the separation papers anyway. She could tell dignity had been left behind somewhere, probably upstairs in the linen-strewn regret of their garbage hotel room. Her mouth, you could tell, wanted to ask questions, but she didn't. Playing the same weak card wouldn't work, not here. I didn't say goodbye. The weekend after the confrontation was a blur. I shut off my phone, unopened messages piling up like they were part of some other life, some other reality. Every time I looked at her name pop up on the screen, it felt like the room closed in on me. So, I stopped looking altogether. Just powered the phone down and let the silence take over. I didn't know what kind of clarity I wanted, but I knew I wouldn't find it through more of her lies. She'd probably send some bullshit apology, maybe try to explain away what couldn't be explained. I didn't have any patience for that anymore. Friday passed into Saturday, but I barely noticed. I wandered through the house as if it belonged to somebody else. Coffee didn't taste right, TV shows didn't hold my attention. Everything was off, muted, distant. The house felt hollow, like the walls were thinner. The voices of the kids outside seemed too far away. Luke's laughter faint, Emma stomping around like she always did, but even that seemed more distant than usual. I thought about joining them, pulling them aside, but what was I going to say? No, they'd get the truth soon enough. For now, it was better to keep my space, to let Sarah twist in the wind, chewing her nails and waiting for something. Anything from me. By Sunday afternoon, I hadn't slept much. Just tossed and turned, mind racing, rehashing all the ways she'd managed to make a fool out of me. But strangely, there wasn't any desire to scream or punch something. Just numbness. Only a dull, throbbing exhaustion that wouldn't go away. Monday rolled around, and with it came the movers. I watched them pull into the driveway, my arms crossed, leaning against the window frame. As they loaded her boxes into the truck, I pretended to read a magazine on the couch. I wanted to be around without really being around, if that makes sense. When Sarah showed up face puffy like she'd been crying for days, I made sure there was no eye contact, no words exchanged, unless it was absolutely necessary. She tiptoed around me, only speaking in that false saccharine tone when the kids were nearby. The explanation she gave the kids for why she was leaving. A masterpiece of careful wordplay. Your father and I need some space to figure out how to handle things like adults, she said. Right. Handle things. She didn't say what things. And sure as hell didn't mention why she needed to move some of her crap into a different apartment, or why I'd made it clear she wouldn't be coming back. But the kids didn't push for details, not then. They just watched her pack up and leave with that blank, confused look, too young to connect the dots. Emma stayed sullen and silent. Luke kept close, quietly asking if she'd be back later. All Sarah could do was nod, fighting back tears she didn't deserve to shed. I offered no comfort, no sympathy. Why should I? 2 months crawled by after that. Sarah came by 3 nights a week like clockwork, though it was as if she were a stranger in what had been our home. I made a point to be busy when she was around, work in the garage, catching up on emails in the office, disappearing for a late-night grocery run, anything to avoid her. When I couldn't escape, our conversations were robotic, minimal. Cut dry with zero emotion behind the words. She still tried, though. I have to give her that. Cooked dinners for the kids, cleaned up, went through the motions of motherhood. You could see it on her face whenever she thought no one was looking. That distant, gnawing pit of realization that no matter how many casseroles she made or laundry she folded, she couldn't glue together what had been shattered. Did I feel bad? No. Watching her grovel didn't make me happy, but it had its own twisted satisfaction. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. At the marriage counseling session she insisted on, she cried a lot. Cried hard. Begged for forgiveness, tried to talk about working it out for the kids' sake, or that we loved each other once. But truthfully, every time I sat in that dimly lit office, fake potted plants in the corner, and heard her go off on some tangent, I'd tune out. Counseling wasn't for me. It was for her. Another performance, another desperate grasp to play the part of someone who gave a damn about what she'd ruined. I just nodded along. Answered questions when the therapist threw one my way, all while mentally tallying up what more I needed to do. Of course, the kids were part of my calculations. I wasn't just going through these therapy sessions to fill an hour of my week. No, I knew the more cooperative I appeared, the better I'd look when this all hit court, when custody would be up for grabs. What lawyer wouldn't eat up the image of a father who'd tried, who'd put his kids first despite all the wrong done to him? Every time I sat down in that musty office, it was another step toward that endgame. To Sarah, she kept playing right into my hands, clueless as to what I was working toward. Around that same time, I cut back my hours at work. Nothing drastic. I still did enough to keep the paychecks coming, but I knew where I needed to be at home, with the kids. Picking Luke up from soccer practice, helping Emma with her school projects when she let me, Every afternoon and evening I spent more time with them. It wasn't even a hard decision. But they needed me, and if I could establish myself as their primary caregiver, the courts would take notice. Sarah, meanwhile, was too wrapped up in her own guilt to see what was really happening. The longer this went on, the deeper she sank, and I kept capitalizing on it. Then came the final touch, weaponizing the truth. I didn't need to sit Emma down and tell her outright what her mother had done. No, that wouldn't have achieved what I wanted. It wasn't enough to simply relay it. I needed her to find it, to stumble upon it, piece things together on her own. That way, it wasn't me turning her against Sarah. It was Sarah doing it herself through her actions. So that's why, on a carefully chosen evening, when I knew Emma would be on the family computer for schoolwork, I accidentally left a folder open, full of articles on surviving infidelity, repairing a broken marriage. Fucking dramatic shit, really. Stuff that screamed pain. Stuff that painted me as the forgiving victim, willing to move forward despite everything. Later that night, Emma found it. I was in the kitchen when it happened, the dull clattering of plates stopping abruptly as I heard a chair scrape across the floor and creak, her body frozen in place. I didn't rush over, let her stew in it for a few minutes before wandering upstairs to see what she'd stumbled onto. When I entered her room, she looked up, tears streaking down her face, a mix of confusion and anger clouding her already stormy expression. So why didn't you tell me? The words came out choked, raw. I did what any good father would do. Sat there and sighed, heavy, catching her with a look of resigned sadness. I didn't want you to hate your mom, I told her, making my voice crack just the right amount. She made a mistake, but she still loves you. Still loves Luke. Emma's eyes hardened after that. And when Sarah showed up the next evening for a visit, Emma barely looked at her. What few words she did speak was sharp, biting. And she spent the whole night shutting Sarah out, retreating behind that angry exterior teens put up when they're done listening to anyone's excuses. But the next night was worse. By the third, there was shouting, full-blown screaming matches between them. Drew and me. I stayed in my lane, acted like I was just as confused as Sarah, though deep down I knew it was going exactly how I wanted. Emma had switched sides, and Luke, sweet, impressionable Luke, he followed her lead. Quietly, he stopped hugging Sarah, stopped greeting her at the door, just kept close to Emma and me. It worked. The fragile strands of whatever hope Sarah had left. They snapped. Each night she looked more beaten down by it until she had nothing left but hollow smiles and tears she tried to hide. And I'd be lying if I said watching that didn't give me a twisted sense of control. The day I filed for divorce felt like the culmination of a war one had been waging in silence for months. All the counseling, the bullshit talks where Sarah bared her soul, begging me to forgive her. The act was exhausting by the end. I had locked away any chance of reconciliation after that night at the hotel, but she never seemed to get the memo. She was desperate, so damn desperate. Desperation I used against her every chance I could, stringing her along with little lies, making her think maybe, just maybe, there was a chance I could forgive her. It wasn't malicious, initially. But the more I saw her grasping at hope, the more I started to enjoy it. It was like dangling a treat just out of reach of a dog, watching her sit there, eagerly waiting for a reward that was never coming. The moment I handed the divorce papers to her, she froze. There was that flicker in her eyes, the last flicker of hope. I'd always hated that false optimism she threw around. Even when everything was crashing down around her, she still clung to the idea that life would just go back to normal if she tried hard enough. She gave me this little, pitiful nod, lips trembling. I knew what she was feeling. She thought I might change my mind at the last second. But no. I walked away. I had won. The kids were the only thing that truly mattered in court. I had to make sure Emma and Luke stayed with me, that the life Sarah had poisoned with her betrayal stayed intact for them. Emma, well, she was easy. I'd planted enough seeds in her mind. She all but despised Sarah by this point. I never told her outright, no, that would give Sarah room to fight back. But the suggestive comments here and there, the little hints left for Emma to discover on her own, worked perfectly. She hated her mother with the ferocity only a teenager could muster. Luke was more of a wild card. He was young, quiet, still trying to figure everything out, but he followed Emma's lead most of the time. And he adored me. That was all I needed. The court wasn't stupid. They could see how things were. So, when both kids voiced their desire to stay with me, it was a done deal. Full custody, just like I'd planned from the beginning. Sarah didn't fight too hard. Her spark had died before she even hit the courtroom. The person she became after the affair was pathetic, really. She was like a ghost. And maybe she thought I'd take pity on her, that we could work something out in private, avoid all that mess. What she never knew was that I had planned this for months. The combination of every move, the separation agreement, the counseling, the talks with the kids, it all led here. Then came the house, of course. My God, her face when she realized I was keeping the house. That stupid house she had suggested we buy 10 years ago because it was the perfect place to raise a family. Well, that family was staying right where it needed to be without her. Oh, and the best part, child support. I hadn't planned on that front, not really. But the court ruled in my favor there too. Sarah wasn't getting away clean. The look on her face as they rattled off the numbers she would owe each month, it was enough to make my day. She'd betrayed everything we built, and now she was paying for it, literally. Every paycheck of hers, drained month after month to support the kids I had taken away from her. 2 years passed like that. It didn't feel fast. It felt like a simmer, with everything settling just how I wanted it to. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Part-time work was enough. I had money saved up from before, and child support covered the rest. So the quiet that came with being a single father suited me. The weekdays were filled with parenting and mundane routines. Laundry, drop-offs, pick-ups, helping Emma navigate school drama, and Luke with whatever sport he was into this month. It gave me purpose, something steady, while Sarah spent her weekends trying to grasp onto the last remnants of normalcy. And me? I indulged. I wasn't interested in a new forever. Why would I be? I spent 2 decades trying that, and look where it got me. These days, the women were young, attractive, and most importantly, simple. They were easy to meet online, plenty of them looking for something quick, no strings attached. That's all I wanted now. Nothing that could touch the life I had left with my kids. It was funny. Sarah thought she had won her freedom back. After all, in her mind, she had gotten away. Gotten to be with whoever she wanted, right? But now she lingered. She spent her weekends with the kids, picking them up, trying to play mom. It was almost amusing. She put this whole facade together like things were fine, and she was just another single mom making the best of it. But she wasn't fooling anyone. Huh? So often I let her come back to the house. For the kids, of course. We had a weird sort of routine now. Or maybe it was just her lack of options. Either way, sometimes after the kids went to bed, I'd let her crawl into my bed again. Now, there was no love in it, but she latched onto that hope she shouldn't have anymore. The same hope I'd been crushing for years. She'd leave in the morning like nothing had happened. But I knew she still thought a part of this could be repaired. Part of me relished watching her squirm for me. After all, she was just a shell of the woman who'd not once betrayed me. The confident, polished woman who stepped out of that hotel with James, none of her remained. I knew I'd never take her back. Not truly. She was miserable, and I liked it that way. I still had her tethered to me, in one way or another. She didn't even realize that I had cemented myself as the one that got away for her. The kids worshipped me, thinking I was the one who had sacrificed for the family. So they had no idea how carefully I had crafted all of this. To them, I was the hero who stuck by them when Sarah fell apart. To Emma, to Luke, I was the solid ground they still stood on. Little did they know, I had orchestrated every single move, every tear, every shattered hope. And I had never felt more in control.